It's always very dramatic when the shades go down here at the lantern. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Sarah Cole. I'm the Interim Dean of the School of the Arts, and I am so happy to welcome you to the Lenfest Center for the Arts at Columbia University. And I'm overjoyed to have everyone here with us tonight for a reading and discussion with the wonderful Claudia Rankine. Let me begin by recognizing that Manhattan and Columbia University are located on the ancestral and traditional homeland of the Lenni, Lenape, and Wappinger people. I know that these land acknowledgements can become routine or can seem rhetorical, so let me say then that I hope and believe that at the School of the Arts, we continue to address issues of exclusion, erasure, and systemic discrimination in our creative work and our teaching. We have here tonight one of our greatest poets and thinkers who addresses these topics. I'm especially excited that Professor Rankine is here in our new inaugural speaker, in the all-new School of the Arts series, Speak Now. Speak Now does what, in many ways, a great deal of our programming here does, which is to feature exceptionally creative artists whose work brims with urgency in addressing our world. These speakers are especially remarkable, these Speak Now speakers, for the way their work sings across disciplines and fields. Their art moves things around. It leaves ripples in the culture. So please stay tuned for more of this series soon. And of course, please also pay attention for all kinds of wonderful listings for other programming at the School of the Arts. And you can also find everything you need about that on our website. So let me thank the Office of the Provost for helping to support this event, as well as Book Culture, which has books over there. And after our whole event concludes, I encourage you to go and buy a book, and Professor Rankine has agreed to sign them for us. I also wish to offer a very special thanks to Gavin Browning, who's sitting right there in the second row, who is always an absolute wonder in all that he does for us, and moreover has been just a great creative spirit when it comes to Speak Now, as he is for so much of our programming at the School of the Arts. And a huge, big, warm thanks to the whole team here at the Lenfest, and especially to Lauren Weigel, who's standing right there, looking ravishing as always, and doing so much for all of us. And of course, thank you all for coming. I'm going to introduce Claudia Rankine now, very briefly, needless to say, since her accomplishments are much too bountiful for me to be able to cover, after which she will come up and read to us from her new work in progress entitled Triage. What a thrill to have her present unpublished work to us, so thank you for that. After she reads, she and I will have a conversation in these well-placed red chairs, and then, importantly, we'll have time for Q&A, and you'll see the microphones there. So Claudia Rankine is, let me just say, essential. Her voice has become one of the most powerful and profound in literature today, as her books have found a way to open up with their mixed poetic, prose, and visual forms many of the most trenchant features of how our world is organized. It is organized according to race and racism. We know that. In Professor Rankine's writing, the deep and troubling meanings around this fact are explored in exquisite and often very difficult to read specificity. She speaks to a national and a world audience, and she does so in a way that is simultaneously unflinching, honest, beautiful, intricate, and troubling. This is work that will make you stop in your tracks, whoever you are, in part because of the way it lays out and lays bare our society's essential racism, its endless self-deceptions, and also because of the seemingly effortless bravura of its craft. It is work that changes its readers even as it endlessly propels the conversation. Claudia Rankine is the author of 5 books of poetry, including Don't Let Me Be Lonely, An American Lyric, and Citizen, An American Lyric, which broke into the National Dialogue in 2014 and proceeded to win every imaginable award. 3 plays, including Help, which premiered in March 2020 at the Shed in New York, and The White Card, which premiered in February 2018 and was published by Grey Wolf Press the following year, and numerous video collaborations. Her recent collection of essays, Just Us, An American Conversation, was published by Grey Wolf in 2020. She's also the co-editor of several anthologies, including The Racial Imaginary, Writers and Race in the Life of the Mind. In 2016, Professor Rankine co-founded the Racial Imaginary Institute. Among her numerous awards and honors, Professor Rankine is the recipient of the Bobbitt National Prize for Poetry, the Poets and Writers Jackson Poetry Prize, and fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Lannan Foundation, United States Artists, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the MacArthur Foundation, the famous Genius Grant. A former chancellor of the Academy of American Poets, Claudia Rankine taught at Pomona College and Yale University before joining the creative writing program at NYU in the fall of 2021. These are wonderful institutions, of course, but Professor Rankine has a very special place here at Columbia. She has her MFA from the School of the Arts in 1993, so very proud of her and of us. I take all kinds of unmerited pride in that. And her book, Citizen, has achieved carved-in-stone status as the final text on the Literature Humanities syllabus, the cornerstone of the famous core curriculum. All in all, it is an honor to have her here, so please welcome Claudia Rankine.
Good evening. It's so nice to see you all. Thank you, Sarah, for that lovely introduction. It's nice to be back here. I was here, I applied to Columbia as an undergrad, and I got in, and I came to visit a class, and everyone was wearing black. And I went back home and I said, I can't go there, they're too old. And I'm a child. So I went to Williams College instead. But then I came back for graduate school, and then I taught at Barnard. So in many ways, this is a home away from home, so it's lovely to be back. I want to thank all the people involved. I can see them. You're not seeing them, but I'm seeing them. And I don't know their names, but I see you, and I thank you. I'm just going to read straight for about 20, 25 minutes, and then Sarah and I will talk. This is from Triage, an excerpt. At 60, it was difficult to remember what all happened at 20. But one thing that stayed with me, because it involved actual movement, perhaps, was a game I played on my college campus in the Berkshires. I wonder now about the term game, since at the time it might have been more accurately named curative action or release valve. Back then, the theorist and I were each other's instigator and witness. Whether we articulated or felt brokenness and internalized distress, I don't know, now know. But we arrived at this action somehow. When we spied each other during the day, we had to collapse. The collapse was literal, and on occasion, an inconvenience to those around us. I'm okay, we said to concerned passerbys. There were no exceptions to the fall, but most times a helping hand up was accepted, as if the collapse had been accidental, unwanted, and not provisional. We were both oddly absent to each other and to our splinters and splits and holes and silences, but present to this falling as a mode of reciprocal recognition. It, the collapse, was an antidote to an undiagnosable but felt feeling. The practice fall to the ground remains a muscle memory. The buckling at the knees comes with a tilt to allow the fall to go sideways, away from the concrete path and onto the grass where possible. How long can this go on? Fall after fall, we imagine. The Berkshire autumns were filled with light slipping between sentient beings, mountains, trees, clouds, buildings, light, traveling through red-orange leaves, illuminating each leaf roused by the wind before it made it to ground. That might have inspired us, the sunlit leaves in their slow descent, taking turns hitting the earth before being aroused again by the wind in circular motion to fall yet again. The moments spent aground, touching dirt, grass, cement, carpet, wood, asphalt, were an introduction to liminal time. These unaccounted for in-between moments before or after meals on the way to elsewhere were neither here nor there. The downward pull of gravity was Persephone-like, were she to lose the mythic point of her journey. Maybe for a moment, the surrender to the collapse allowed us to be alive in alignment with our feelings. For minutes at a time, we were outside time's logic, free-falling effortlessly on our own way to nowhere. Sometimes sitting up on the damp ground, I momentarily lost the will to resume whatever I had been involved in the moment before, the theorist once admitted. That was the danger, the complete giving over to the collapse, as if it were possible to maintain a state of collapsing cohesion in the damp. Decades later, when the theorist was asked during a Q&A how they felt given what's known about the world, they said sometimes they wanted to throw themselves in front of a speeding car. That got everyone's attention. They knew it would. They were a bit of an exhibitionist. They said they weren't suicidal, but they were exhausted. They used a different term that had to do with spilling over that I don't now recall. The desire was to enter the busy street, drop down where they stood, and let the world's vehicles roll over them. The fantasy has its appeal. They said when the exhaustion overtook them, they knew it was time to lay it all down. In this way, collapsing is like sleep or death, but only like it. At the moment of collapse, one falls fully clothed. If one is fully clothed, as if nothing else matters. The desire to throw oneself down, despite what the novels say, has little to do with sex and everything to do with breath. To be disheveled, rumpled, creased, to fall out of our modes of decorum and civility means little. I like to think that this form of collapse is momentary. This is my attachment to life speaking. I want to believe we enter the collapse with the idea that at a future moment, one must be ready to soldier on, which is not to say one couldn't fall asleep or die and defy uprightness in unexpected ways. The overwhelming too muchness, that's the term the theorists use, prevents sleep and suspends one in the space of the collapse. There, one is on one's own in the moment of the fall, falling seemingly involuntarily. To remain in a state of literal collapse while remaining in our collapsing world would have us drowning with a whole other kettle of fish. And although the Latin origin of collapse means falling together, we are there without being there collectively. I don't think so, not yet. I'll revise and say the collapse is in part about feeling spent and a lot about feeling helpless, in or maybe abandoned to the moment. I say this from experience on the Thursday in February of the leap year to the theorist, hoping a life counts for something. Our social arrangements enact the single point of power in powerlessness. In the old order, our wealth, our poverty, our geography, our race, gender, religion, and so on define generally our complicity, silence, resolve, resignation, resistance. The R train roared through our will, or was it our hearts? Each one getting off at their stop without looking back. Back then, there was a promise that kept us on the line, in line. As the category of human shows its fragility more clearly each day, the ground on which it stands reveals its conditional volatility more clearly too. What if we always had to figure out what was happening to our buckling limbs in real time? As we are released into the gestalt of this century, right here, right now, engenders the collapse as an external pressure drops us into a feeling of immense, inordinate, massive, devastating, staggering, irrepressible, unbearable emotion that could break us apart. Apart rhymes with heart. My heart aches. Perhaps, altogether, some hearts ache. Did I already say the theorist was dying? They said they were poisoned. And why not believe them? Couldn't the letters C and O in collapse not signal poisoning by the odorless and colorless gas more laboriously known as carbon monoxide? It exists with us like our culture of violence and inhumane practices and conditional humanity and all the other realities we push aside as we continue on. One mode of pushing is the phrase, "We know all about it." But knowing doesn't make anything less poisonous. I'm thinking we should give ourselves that understanding at least, at the very least. This is where the couch comes in. Padded cushions with no sag springs, held together by material design to take the wear and tear of all the ups and downs. Now, that does sound like sex. But only if sex were all of life, including an immeasurable, unbearable, predatory violence that leads to unimaginable assault, the wretched despair, the pathetic disgrace of it, the unrelenting cruelty, the sudden arrival, the repeated abuse, the unwanted, unwarranted advance of it, which means not sex, but something else entirely. No. Tragically. Something else, tragically. At times, from a prone position on the couch, collapsing could be considered an act of tenderness toward the self. The too muchness acknowledge the weightiness. But to speak of it solicits, well, there are gestures from others, not exactly an eye roll, but a look away, a look down, a look at the third one there, a shadow maybe, the wave of a hand, the yawn, seemingly uncontrollable, the crossed leg, the uncrossed leg, the pursed lips, the folded arms, a cough, communicating what? Debbie, lighten up, be happy, stay on the bright side of life. To speak of it, well, We know there are subtle adjustments we ourselves make mindlessly to what is being felt, what is being done, not just to the self, not just in plain sight. And these additions, distractions, attractions, they imply all kinds of feeling proximate with the shut-eye. Rom-com, gin and tonic, sex, yes, and the favorite, just breathe. All help to facilitate or accommodate our collective blindness as we fall all together now or not. Because in that world out there, the theorist died a day ago. Not true. It always feels like yesterday, but the years are adding up. Close to their end, they said, "We're done for. Everything ruinous has been touched on without touching anyone. Be grateful you lived this long. You will die soon too." The theorist might be a stand-in for all manner of governance, having every surname in the good book that doesn't mind passing out death sentences to the living. Be assured, I held our ground. I straightened and stood tall. I whispered back at them, "What kind of person are you? Don't take away a life before it's gone." They responded, "It's okay. Resist all you want. I can take it." Then they coded out. They were apparently not the only one piling death on. Luckily, somewhere, someone is performing the glory of Icarus before the fall. If I suspend reality and stay with them in the seconds of flight, I can see beauty in what soars. For as long as it lasts, how does one make beauty eternal? How does one make that the promise? The light's texture, its softness almost tangible, though I confess to you now, in a sky full up with weather, beauty communicated only by a red-orange sun bleeding into the coming years is likely in part man-made. Icarus coloring everything, outsized our human scale. And now all bets are off, runoff dusting the landscape, spores, particles, gases owning the air. The earth is out, no more to give. The end. It's driving us crazy. Perhaps the time before the fall can exist as the belief that we are smarter than our delusion. Then we could arrive at any time and any place holding on to all we know, knowing we are collapsing even as we are soaring. If everything is piling on except for the possibility of a future, I understand why we won't say presence and presence departing. At the same time, from within the collapse, the couch will be a place to brood from. The theorist might have reminded me. There is a symmetry to the couch's need to receive and our need to announce we are in need of a place to land. The mouth grabs at air as if breath will be the last breeze to rouse us. I collapse into slip-covered cushions to leave with more. And I don't mean more dreamy delusion, even though couch takes its name for the French word for sleep. Voulez-vous coucher avec moi ce soir? And despite TikTok's Delulu is the Solulu, or Netflix Don't Look Up, I don't know why we won't just say, the future is behind us. We know it already, but it needs to be said, or we will struggle against the wrong ones. Far from the trunks of trees, roots are surfacing in the road like a global insult refusing to be tarred over. Devastate the landscape and our warmth will exceed 1.5 Celsius. Them's the facts. Then migration is inevitable. It already exists for anyone who once held a passport in a country with resources in another sightline. Turns out if a tree is felled in a forest and nobody hears, the people are coming. As more land turns inevitable, life and loss syncs up in inhuman ways. And despite a global insistence that no humans are involved, we await our response. Our present moment of misalignment in the body, with the body being refused its future, functions as the initial collapse. Within us, the too muchness of recognition collapses not the self, but the humanity in the self first. Devastated is the recognition the self should hold. But rage and fear, raging fear, a rage-filled fear informs even the non-responsive. Don't think about this until it comes back for you. Why can't we simply engage the collapse and say the future is behind us while falling gently onto the couch, overheated in our eco-cashmeres, our mushroom leathers, understanding the world has lost its access. Voulez-vous coucher avec moi ce soir? Why won't we just know we need to be understanding time differently? Delulu is the only Solulu. The theorists would have grinned at that, the grin smashing their eyes shut right before they pivoted towards the middle of the road, facing the traffic as if life functions such that one can say something is caught in the throat, though the thing caught blocks the completed breath. The world tilts its head to one side, momentarily distraught, confused, enthralled, already distracted. People are cruel, cruelly distracted. We are brutal. A thought comes. If something is actually caught in the throat, a person can scream all they want, but no sound will come out. Shipwrecked off the coast of sound. Whatever is then on mute, theoretically. The worst lives on muted repeat. This clearly is more preferable than the gasp. Are outcries allowed in a century of no good choices, where even the outcry comes back for you? We must have decided in our prior resilience that anything else could always remain adjacent. A table's edge, a CPR-educated passerby with some practical knowledge, a DNR. We try to bet on the one who will cease simply observing, the one who knows when to punch us in the chest, a sudden blow, and we are breathing again. It's a maneuver. Be grateful for it. Even then, in that moment, recalling life, grasping for air as if for the first time, with gratitude, we embrace the violent encounter. The theorists could not be revived. They did not survive their fall. A terminal emergency radiated, not innate, entered only through an encounter with the outside, what to live for becoming what to die for in the doubling. The knee buckled, the ankle refusing to rotate, just a softening in the joints as the body went to rest. If one got closer, there was probably another indicator of release, perhaps in the jaw drop. The theorist was mid-sentence, in the middle of everything, but not really. At the end, really. I know, because that's where I find myself. To live at the end is to hold what is furthest in the future close. I can only attempt this by being interested in what the past has put in place to pollute the flow of time. Every sunrise, a pink dusting dropping into blue, clouds suggested barely, is a form of atrophy. The theorists surely might have added. They thought all the straight talk kept them upright. They thought straight talk was a natural addition in a neutral position, the way light, all that visibility, can make one get up and walk to a window or step into the street or run into a meadow as if we were all named Christina. It was never Christina's world. Every Andrew knows that. The news of this filled the theorists with immeasurable theory, then grief, then more theory about whom needed to be grieved. That halted their breath. At the appointed time, I will have to outrun the theorist's death in order to meet my own. One at a time, one enters into a final collapse. One at a time. The collapse is within the life within. There remains no real antidote to the collapse except to collapse without coming apart. While coming apart, the heart aches. Before another step, absorb the texture of whatever is touched when one touches down. The heart breaks. Break up the muted call with its fractured O, texture of whatever is touched when one touches down. It's never just the hard, familiar hit of ground. There's texture in whatever is touched when one touches down. Resist the frantic desire to undo our moment. Resist the fear of one's weight falling into the texture of whatever is touched when one touches down, even if the whatever is whomever is touched. All ourselves broken apart, all our vowels lost to consonants, the R's raging war, rousing the quiet, sinking a body's want to rise up. Rise up. Thank you. You can thank me later for that upbeat rock and roll song.
All right. Well, thank you for that rock and roll upbeat song. But seriously, thank you for everything, but for reading this powerful new work. I had the advantage of all of you of having this an hour ago, maybe 2 hours ago. So I've been trying to sit with it a little bit. And I thought maybe we could start, since we are all just still wrapped in that reading, just to talk a little bit about what we heard, and maybe we could talk a little bit more about the project Triage. I thought maybe I would actually start, since I'm sure everyone in the audience is thinking this, with these images of couches. And these artists, I gather there are 3 or 4 artists. You can see some overlap, some that seem to be repeated. I didn't have time to sort of investigate them. But I, for one, had a lot of associations that came when I saw those couches. Just, the basic principle of way back to Mary Douglas and Purity and Danger, dirt is matter out of place, which is an anthropological idea from quite a while back now. But there's something about the couch, the space of home, when it's out of its place, when it's in a museum, when it's in that sort of substance that looks a little bit like a landfill, when it's broken apart. So it seems like part of what the couch is doing in the reading is acting as a kind of stable-ish space, but here in these works, the couch is already uprooting any idea of those kinds of spaces like home, or the notion of relaxing, or the notion of a kind of walled enclosure. They're very problematically placed in places where they're not supposed to be. So I wonder if we could just talk a little bit about these works and how you're thinking about them. And I don't usually use the word deconstruction, but they felt very deconstructed to me. So maybe we could think about some of that and then move into the poetry you just read us.
Well, thank you. I read this piece. This is only the 3rd time I've read it, but I read it initially without the couches at Berkeley, and then I read again at Berkeley with the couches, and the people who had heard the first reading were surprised that the couches looked like that. They thought, oh, they were supposed to be a place to hold us, not this. But they have to be this, because the idea is there actually is no place to hold us, that we are in an unprecedented moment. And I'm really, I don't know about you, but I'm really interested in the notion that this moment is actually not like every other moment. Like if this were 1943, would we say, oh, this is just like now? No. And so what's the difference in this? And many, like this one, many of them are in the landscape. And I think we have never been in a situation where our external world is echoing our political world and might be echoing our psychological worlds. So all of it happening at once is what, to me, makes that statement legitimate now. Because I have never before felt quite at a loss in terms of where to look for a solution to what is happening. I think before we had a sense that, oh, well, the branches of the government, they will keep each other in check. Or we thought, the two-party system is going to work, or we are not going to see again the kinds of things that we're seeing now. And then, we had the pandemic, we had COVID, we have ongoing wars, and we're trying to make a life and not quite sure. And also, it's important to add, we're unwilling to give up anything. Despite all we know. And that we includes me. As the temperature rises, my air conditioner is on. And I'm knowing that there's a problem with that, and my air conditioner is on. So what does that mean? What does that mean for us? So the couches, they are unsettled because we are unsettled. And the artist, this is Martine Sims. That couch is wrapped in a moving blanket because it's meant to move around. I tried to use artists who were themselves using the couch to critique something. Sarah Lucas, I don't know if you know her work. She is a British artist who has critiqued patriarchy for a very long time. Hers, this is David Hammond's with the dirt, but hers are the couches with the lights that are broken apart. And she has looked at a kind of way in which a patriarchal culture has undermined her own abilities over time and our abilities to move forward. So those are the kinds of artists that I have gravitated to, and unknowingly, there's Sarah Lewis, unknowingly, I'm in collaboration with. At some point, I will tell them that I am hoping they will be in collaboration with me, but right now I'm just gathering the images.
So thank you. Now I want to ask a whole bunch of new questions. So, you know, your sense that maybe at one time there were solutions we could imagine or structures we could turn to, and at some point this evening I hope we'll talk a little bit about how in your previous two books, Just Us and Citizen, who many of you here may have read one or both of those, you are looking at the concept of America or citizenship or even justice, possibly, as problematic as all those things are. Here, I guess the concept that seems to be functioning that way, and it's a much less hopeful one, is triage. And I wondered if you might talk about that. In fact, in my little sort of scribbled notes from earlier, when I was thinking about triage, I was thinking about what you were just saying about the overlapping of the person in their body and some kind of larger collective or the planet. I thought that passage where you describe the roots and the heating up of the planet to be extremely powerful, and for me sort of got at that question of how this idea of triage is possibly trying to either hold together for you or exposing those overlapping. So I wonder if you might want to think about that. And I was really struck, as I'm sure were everybody in the audience, by the whole sort of medical scene and the way you captured some of these aspects of the experience of dying that your theorist friend is sort of theorizing and being in. And that word triage really stood out for me, even if we don't have a book with that title in front of us. So I wonder if that's doing some of this work of holding things together that you were saying a moment ago isn't happening, and that's why the couches have to be falling apart.
Well, triage. I had the unlucky situation of falling, having written about falling, and then suddenly I fell, and I ended up in the NYU emergency room, and I had never been there before. All of New York was there. I'm here to tell you, if you want to see all of New York, go to the emergency room at NYU. And they had a triage center. And it was interesting because they come around and they don't do anything. They just assess you. This one needs this and this one needs that. But nobody does anything for a long time. And then eventually the right person comes to you. In my case, a surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon. But I'm interested in this moment because it seems like what we are all doing, I'm using we all erroneously, but we're assessing without action. I had a friend who was in Dubai at the climate change conference recently, and I said to him, well, what was decided? You all traveled halfway around the world. What was decided? Nothing. Nothing. They were going to give money to countries whose resources they had taken, and who were now in situations that were untenable, but they were not allowed to become refugees in any of the countries that had actually raped their landscape, basically. But they were going to give them some cash to hold over until the tsunami comes, you know? So this idea that we're assessing without action, I mean, that triage is really not the solution, it's just the assessment. And we have a lot of assessment. We have people telling us all the time that New York is sinking, and yet we keep building the skyscrapers. And then we say, oh, nobody wants to live in them, but we keep building the skyscrapers. Oh, we're sinking at this amount each day, but we keep, you know. And so it's a funny world, this, where we cannot stop soaring, even as we're collapsing, to quote myself. But so that I wanted the book to live in that place of triage, because I was also thinking about COVID. And, you know, I recently moved back to New York after being away for a long time, and I was shocked at the situation of the homeless in the streets. And when you go to San Francisco, it's the same, and LA, obviously. But I was thinking that during COVID, we heard about how many older people, the older population who died. But we didn't think about what service they were performing. So that meant a whole generation of grandmothers, of parents, of aunts, uncles, all kinds of people left. And suddenly that extra couch that people could sleep on when they were suddenly homeless or suddenly without a job went away. I mean, they were performing an essential service that this country has always turned away from. I mean, the suicide rates in the United States is higher than any other developed nation in the world, and that's because we don't have basic things that other countries provide to their citizens. And but we ask families to do that, and then those families, a whole layer got wiped away during the pandemic, and then we saw them all outside in the streets. I mean, they had fallen all the way down. So it's, and there's no getting in there and fixing that. They're gone. Those people are gone. So I want to stay in that moment for a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. We have my colleague Marianne Hirsch is here, and others who've been involved in working on projects about memorializing and thinking about the pandemic in a very local way, that is in particular neighborhoods and areas. And this country likes to forget and move on. So, you know, when you were talking about services, I mean, I just couldn't help but thinking about, as many of us who were in New York at that time remember, that the essential workers of all kinds were the ones who got sick and died early on, and this idea of what is a service seems, and what service do people play, and how does their racial or class or demographic, you know, background determine that and their safety. But I wanted to ask about collapsing, which is a really big thing in this at least what we heard of your book, and it seems to be working in a lot of ways. I was really very taken with those passages where you describe the second time for your friend in death, or in your thinking about their death, the knees buckling, the body sort of twisting down, that very kind of anatomized, sort of described, imagined moment of the body moving to the ground. And of course, that echoes what you had described in your game or performances at Williams. Did you guys really do that?
We did do that.
That's nuts. I mean, it's so interesting. We could spend the whole time on that, but we have lots of other things to talk about. But it did remind me, actually, not to bring up things that, could get controversial, but why not, of a performance piece by a former student at Columbia from a number of years ago, Emma, how did you pronounce her last name? Sukovich? She was the mattress girl who, for her final project, based on an experience of rape and what she felt was an inappropriate and unacceptable response in the justice system, carried her mattress around the campus for the rest of the semester. And many of us who were here remember seeing it. And your thing kind of reminded me a little bit of that, actually, like a very powerful, embodied kind of performance piece that in your case seems to have been kind of a private joke or thing, but had that way of centering some very profound problems in our society, which then kind of come up as you think about collapsing later as kind of that desire, that exhaustion, that sense, I just can't fight this thing anymore, this world that we live in. So these are just a few thoughts that I had, but I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about that concept of collapse and how you go back to that time in college, and if that feels like, in a kind of a weird way, it was determining things, or you turn back to it now to understand what you later were experiencing. And again, just to thank you for those amazing revelations about the way the body falls.
We did do that. We did it for a long time. It was a challenge. You know how you do those things in college. You're like, every time I see you, you better fall down. And so we did. And I don't know when we stopped. I don't have a memory. I know I can still feel the fall, so I know we did it for a long time. But I don't know when we just got bored of doing it, or just maybe the snow was too wet and we didn't want to do it anymore. It was probably that. But I hadn't thought about it for years. And it was only in thinking about the kind of exhaustion that I feel now that I remembered doing it. Because this present moment, this is probably too much information, but I went for my yearly, GYN checks, and the doctor was, doing the MRI thing, and so we were talking about the fact that we both had daughters. And so she said, "How old's your daughter?" And I told her, and she said, "Oh, my daughter's, a few years older. She's in graduate school." And it was funny. This woman, she's a famous doctor, obviously very ambitious woman. And she said, "Well, my daughter is at Harvard, but I think she's gonna come home because I think she wants to be closer to us." And normally, and this is what she said, normally, I wouldn't support this, because what is she gonna do? But given the way things are, I said, "Yeah, come home." And so that, given the way things are, that's that moment that I think we all share right now. And each of us approach that, enter it differently. Like we each have our own understanding of what the way things are means to us. But there is a sense that we are falling. And if the only thing we can give to each other is ourselves, we better do it now. And so I was really struck by her because I could tell she was like, but. But it didn't need explanation. We are on the precipice of a lot of unknowns. And what's, with my students downtown, sometimes they say to me, I'm not voting. I'm not voting in the next election. It doesn't matter. And I am in that situation where I don't want to be the old lady who is like, oh no, it does matter. So I'm trying to listen, I'm trying to hear. But I'm thinking, fascism is not a thing that you want to hold off. And then I hear another phrase, let it all fall. Just let it all fall. And I think, what does that mean? What does that mean, to let it all fall? And when it falls, who's going to catch whom? Who gets to stay and who really does fall? So, and yet I know why they're saying it. And that's what's difficult about this moment. I know why they're saying it. I understand how we have gotten ourselves into this moment where it is difficult to feel like action means. And yet we have to act.
Yeah, I just want to sit with that for a moment. I think that dynamic between a kind of profound despair even, or resignation, or sense of it's too late, or too much has already come before to make us feel there's any possibility of a better future or something, or the possibility of change, meets a kind of indelible spirit that I find in all of your writing. I wanted to read, I was reading around and I found an essay called Why I Write that was recently published in earlier, I guess it's 2024 now, so about a year ago in spring of 2023. My field is modernism, and so these passages really resonated for me as someone who's spent a lot of time working with writers from around 100 or so years ago who thought a little bit like this. So I'm just going to read a little bit. You write, "We live adjacent to expression. The words, like some people, are trying. The stories are trying. The reports attempt to locate. The fictions live close to the nonfiction, but all utterance loses its way. All utterance is wayward." I love that line. And then a little further down you write, "The language again fails to reflect because its object is a moving target of a world out of order and on a collision course with itself. With so much writing now, there's no longer a sense of a future," and you were just reading about this. "What to do when there is nothing to do? We, the writers, are also out of order, and therefore our words are out of order too." And you can see that with the couches. I couldn't resist reading this famous line from Beckett: "There's nothing to express, nothing with which to express, nothing from which to express, no power to express, no desire to express, together with the obligation to express." Discuss. But it does feel like you're articulating something for this moment that is very particular to now, that is felt in very personal terms for you as a writer, and at the same time it comes with this Beckett's obligation to express, why I write, this quality of doing it, getting back up off the couch and doing, or maybe you write on the couch, not those couches, getting up off the couch and doing this work. So I wonder if you can share a little bit about that dynamic in which is really very palpable in this recent work, but also throughout, I think, your writing.
Well, you are now heading up the arts, what do you call
School
it?
of the Arts.
School of the Arts.
Don't please say that loudly. School of the Arts at Columbia.
The School of the Arts, where I went, my alma mater. And I have to tell you, I really believe in the power of the arts, culturally. I mean, I cannot, I'm a little embarrassed to be saying it. And I don't know why it embarrasses me. Maybe because it's like saying, oh, what you do is so important, Claudia. But I think that there is a way in which we are inside a culture where everything is failing us. The media is failing us. We've seen that. We've seen how people have given up on journalism. The journalists, I don't know what they're doing. I don't know how they live with themselves. News is no longer news. But the one place I feel like I can go where things are reflected back at me in a way that I understand, even though it's not mirroring in that way, is in the arts. It's in the poetry, in the fiction, in the visual arts, in the dance, in the music. And so, you know, I'm beginning to understand now why the dictators killed the artists, why they were the ones put in prison first. Because there is still the freedom there. And it's, you know, where is it? Maybe I didn't bring it with me. It's in my backpack. But I've been reading Far Away. Do you guys know that play? It's going to be showing here at the end of the month, the Carol Churchill. And that woman is incredible. And I have found so much solace in reading her work of late. And I carry it with me, and now I'm memorizing it because I want to be able to pull it up when I need it. And it really is out of need. So I just think that we cannot give up on our craft as artists, because at least for most of us, nobody's asking us to do it. We're doing it because we must do it. And that gives us a kind of honesty that perhaps, and a kind of looking around, a kind of fearlessness that I feel is being abandoned in many other places. I mean, people are running scared. They're scared of their students. They're scared of, I don't think we've quite gotten to the place where we're scared of our children, but it might be coming. So I just, I thank God for all the literature that is out there.
Yeah, well, amen to that. I think everybody here agrees with that, and that's why we're here, and your work has touched so many people, and I don't mean that in a kind of calming way, like shaking us up. Maybe we could spend a few minutes before we turn to Q&A on some of your previous work or your body of work, perhaps. One thing that I find so interesting and important about your work is that well, first of all, I wanted to ask about this concept of conversation, which is a very important term for you. It's the subtitle of your most recent book before Triage, which hasn't out yet, Just Us, An American Conversation, which follows Citizen, an American Lyric, and your earlier one, another lyric. So you move from lyric, which seems like a personal, traditionally, voice, although the way you do it, it's quite collective and social, I think, but to conversation. And there's a lot of conversation actually in Citizen as well, of course. But I wonder if we could think about that. I mean, at the end of Just Us, I mean, I could read it, a little bit of it, but you know, you're making some of the moves that are similar to what you were saying now about kind of, again, a kind of suggestion that we realize this isn't going to get us all that far, but we keep doing it, you know, and that sense that the relentlessness of the conversation is what we need and what we will do. And that's going to mean a lot of different things. Right now, we're in a place in time where it can be hard to have conversations. But I find your belief in, investment in, creation of conversation to be a very, very interesting and important idea. And I thought maybe we could talk about that. And one of the things that I was just going to add is that it seems like the conversation continues across from work to work. I find some repeated phrases and ideas, personae that come back, and I find that very compelling. And you're not the first or the only writer to extend a conversation with your own work over time, but I think there is that very powerful quality. We have a tendency to think of each work of art as kind of standing alone, in relation maybe to a public or to its readers, but you really are kind of going back and revising and rethinking, so you're in conversation with yourself, with your earlier interlocutors, with your public, and then your books are these spaces of conversation. So it seems like a very capacious construct for you and a way of doing, and also a way of having your readers doing. I was telling Claudia when we were chatting before that I was thinking about some issues that Just Us brought up, and my instinct was to go email my college roommates and ask if they remembered it. And I thought, that's such a Claudia thing to do. And then to start saying to them, do we remember it differently from her because we're white? And I didn't know at the time, I didn't realize it, but I was thinking I'm enacting the kind of practice that you're showing, and that maybe is part of what you're hoping for. So that's a lot of ways of asking you about this one idea of conversation.
Listening to you made me realize that it's not it is the conversation I'm invested in, but only because it means that you're invested in another person. There is no conversation without the other. So I would probably back up and say I'm always invested in you, and in what you're thinking, and partly because, in many ways, my livelihood depends on you. And it seems like that might not be immediately true, but it is. It is. But I wanted to read this little quote by, I think I have it here, by Paul Celan. It's from a poem he has called The Leaf Treeless. He says, "What times are these when a conversation is almost a crime? Because it includes so much made explicit." And I have always held that very close, that idea that you cannot say things if you're going to say what is happening. And we all know what I'm talking about. And we are now in a situation where having a conversation can go as far as you losing your job. We've seen it. I was just recently in Dubai, and somebody asked a question, and the other writer said, "I'm not answering that question because I have worked too hard to get what I have. And if I answer that question, I will not be allowed in the rooms I'm now allowed in. I will not be allowed to get the things that I have only now, after years of working hard, been able to get. So no, I'm not answering the question. And I thought, I am so glad you said that. I'm going to answer the question, but I am so glad you said that, because so many of us are being bullied into this moment of silence, where the speaking just facts are considered a crime. So I'm really interested in staying in relation with the people around me, and in giving them as much as I can, all of me, all that I know, all that I feel, all that can be handed over, and holding what they give me. Which is not to mean I don't question, which is not to mean I reflect back, because I am a different person. But I can stand with you. I can hold it, whatever it is. And in fact, you can hold it too. And how we have gotten to this place where we feel we can't hold things, can't consider them, especially in institutions of learning. Why the fuck are we here, if not for that?
You know, in Just Us, in both these books, you present, I was going to say yourself, but writers know that it's a persona also, so the narrator, the speaker, herself at dinner parties and other conversations, making people uncomfortable and making people look down at their plates and wish you hadn't said that, and feeling exhausted doing it. And, you know, you end the Just Us with these lines. What I know is that an inchoate desire for a future other than the one that seems to be forming our days brings me to a seat around any table. I was thinking about this because of the person who said I can't answer that because I could lose my job. To lean forward, to hear, to respond, to await response from any other. Tell me something, one thing, the thing, tell me that thing. Just love that. We're going to move to questions, and so I'm going to suggest that people slowly start to move towards the microphones, and we'll take them. But as you're doing that, I have to ask one last question, because we're at Columbia, and Citizen is the final text on the Literature Humanities syllabus. So any of you who are teaching that class, taking that class, have taken that class, know what that means. I was telling Claudia that this talk sold out. I mean, sell out because it's free, but it filled within 3 hours of it opening. And I was saying to someone, well, at Columbia, having Claudia Rankine come is a little bit like having Plato show up, or Montaigne, or Shakespeare. So here you are, you're carved in the stone, and you know, when you watch sports games, they have, after the person has won the Super Bowl, they say, this must be a great moment. How does it feel? So I'm not going to ask you that. It probably feels mixed. But I am going to ask you a slightly different question, which is, I mentioned I'm a modernist, and I was thinking about T.S. Eliot's famous construct in traditional individual talent, that every new work, and in his snooty way, he says genuinely new work, like the ones that matter, change everything that came before them. So it's not that you read them all and then the new one comes and that's its thing. It actually revises how we read everything. And I was thinking about that when thinking about Citizen joining all these others from Homer on down, and just wondered if you, in your own teaching and work and thinking about these issues around canon formation and how we line up. I mean, your works are so full of literary reference and allusion, and you just talked about, thank God for the literature. So or thank goodness, I should say. You didn't use a religious terminology. But anyway, so I just wondered if you wanted to think with us about that. And then meanwhile, while she's answering, if people want to start to come to the microphones and ask questions, I'm sure she'd be ready to take some questions.
What I think about that is I agree with that. I think, and Eliot is a great one for having all, he also says that not only do you revise what's come before, you make what you make from what's come before. No question. I mean, his books are full of allusion. But as I was listening to you, I was thinking about the fact that I was in Dubai, and Dubai, you know what they're doing, they're paying people like $500 million to use their name, and they're building these amazing museums. So they have one called the Louvre Dubai, and I think the Met is going to be the Met Dubai, and the Guggenheim is there, and which I don't understand because the buildings are beautiful. I'm like, just give it your own name, but okay, whatever. It's not for me to question. But while I was there, we're on this tour of the stuff that's in the Louvre, which has been borrowed from the Louvre. And one of the paintings looks just like the Mona Lisa. And it's apparently the model for the Mona Lisa. Except it's a young man. And we're looking at it, and it's like, this young man looks very familiar. But I love the fact that the Louvre was willing to give that up and send it to Dubai. But the fact that I have managed to get all the way to 60, and I have never seen that before, in terms of thinking about what is stitched into all of the things. And apparently the Mona Lisa was meant to be given to him.
To the previous Mona Lisa.
To the previous Mona Lisa. But you can do with that as you may.
Hello, thank you so much for allowing us to share space with you tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure. 2 words that spoke to me was collapse as well as rest. And I saw your reading tonight speak in tandem with a project that's also at the Center for Black Visual Culture called Black is Rest. It was an exhibition, the Black Rest Project. And so for me, I see the juxtaposition between Black bodies being made to rest, whether that's at the hands of police violence or racial capitalism, and bodies being laid to rest, whether that's at the hands of a loved one or in an erotic embrace. So I was wondering if you could speak more about that juxtaposition, the juxtaposition between the both and the practice of rest as a practice of violence, but also rest as revolutionary practice.
Thank you for that question. In other parts of the book, I do mention that that project. And it comes up in terms of Justice Jackson. Do you remember the confirmation hearings? One of the pieces in Triage is about the fact that when Cory Booker, do you remember this? I feel like this was one of the most important things that have happened to me in a long time. But when Cory Booker, during the confirmation hearing, said to Justice Jackson, look, what these white senators are doing is deplorable, to use Hillary Clinton. He didn't use that word. He said, it's unacceptable, blah, blah, blah. But then he said, but it's not going to stop. But I got you. I'm here. And I'm so glad you're here. And she started to cry. And I thought, wow, this is the first time a woman who is being abused by these assholes is allowed to be emotional in front of all of us. And for me, that was a moment of rest. That was like black rest. That was a black man saying to a black woman, take this moment and release it. It doesn't matter that you're here. Just release it. And so yes, this idea of collapsing, one of the forms I'm interested in is the kind of myth of the black woman who was never allowed to rest, who was never allowed to collapse. And that it is now a form of revolutionary care for her to take that rest, to have a cry in front of those, I don't even know what to call them, and then to move on, you know? And then to get up and to have her daughter say congratulations, and to, you know, it's kind of funny that I always feel like when the black woman goes in is when the court has no power, but okay. But it will change, it will change.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing this space with us and your work. I'm going to try and wrap my words around this question because it's one that I'm still working through and living. I'm a climate scientist, communicator, and also an artist and writer, and I find the latter quite necessary to move through the former. I just graduated from the climate school and was often at the forum right across the street there. And I came to campus yesterday actually and was listening to some environmental lawyers talk who I do quite respect, or rather I should say I asked a question thinking about the upcoming election and what's happening in Palestine right now, and the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of people are exploring or wondering what it means to participate in an election and voting when we see what's happening and when we see so much of our voices and bodies on the street in various forms being ignored. And so I asked them a question around how to connect and encourage and move through our own individual voting responsibilities. And I was met with what we've heard before, which is that there is a lesser of two evils right now. And I am working through how I feel about that, quite frankly, but sorry for the long setup, but I wonder what one, you think about that, and two, the question behind the question I was asking is, you know, how can art and activism play a role in navigating this kind of inquiry? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Well, as I was saying, I mean, it is a difficult time. It's, you know, we all, I know that when, you know, I grew up watching Anne Frank, and, you know, that sound of the police coming down the street that you hear when you're watching Anne Frank, and then you go to Europe and you hear it and you think, okay, that's that sound. And the question was always, if I had been alive in 1943, would I have had the strength to say no to this? Would I have been able to say, this is unacceptable? This cannot go on? Would I have been part of the French resistance? Would I have done this? Would I have done that? And you want to hope that you would. You would have. And so now we're in a similar moment, you know. And so I think as the numbers rise up, 30,000 dead, people shot, trying to get aid and food, yesterday or the day before, it's hard to know how to understand a world that has not rushed in to reroute Netanyahu in the same way that we would rush in to try and reroute Putin or whoever. Same in the Sudan. Things are happening in Sudan that are unacceptable. And then we come home and we think, what is our responsibility as citizens to this election relative to our global responsibilities? What do we do? And that's a question for everybody in this room, and everybody's going to answer it at some point. If they stay home, they're answering it. If they go to the polls on November 4th, they're answering it. If they, there's no not answering it. And we are going to pay for this. It will come back to us in some way. So and I have spoken to a lot of groups who are now rerouting their funding and their efforts from the presidential election to the local elections. That's been their way. They're like, I can't support this, but I will support the local elections. So everybody will come up with their own answer for how they will sit with what goes forward.
I think we have time for one last question.
Okay, hopefully this isn't too long. Just a deep thank you from everyone who has taken LitHum. I think this has maybe shifted my life again, but that was such an apt way to put it, of it changes everything past, not only all of the texts we read, but also experiences. And what this shifted for me, listening to what you recited, was this morning I was sitting in Introduction to the Hebrew Bible with Beth Berkowitz at Barnard, and we talked about the book of Job and how God says to Job, basically, you should scream, you're in the right to scream, and says to his friends who are saying, no, you must have done something wrong, like you're supposed to just take life as it is. They're the wrong ones. Job, you're supposed to scream. And I walked out of class feeling like as happy as I felt in quite a while, thinking, oh my gosh, I could scream, I forgot about that. And I think that is, during the interview too, when you said that there's some like really essential thing about the arts. Just when I was walking through Campus Day, I thought that's what it is in the arts, is letting out that scream. But it seems like that just everything right now is something to scream about. And yet, like, you were talking about these blocks, and there's just, in journalism, in so many areas, I feel like we see nothing really, like, coming through at the center. I keep watching movies, and I'm like, wow, like, visually, this is amazing, but where is the movie? Like, where is the core of it? And so, what screams are worth it? And sorry, that's, like, probably as big of a question as I could ask, but if anyone knows, I feel like you would, because all of what you've said is entirely worth it.
Actually, that is the question, actually. What screams are worth it? I mean, and that's what everybody's trying to get at. When do I get up off the couch? What is it going to take? What, when, how? That, I wish I had an answer. I wish I knew. Right after, during COVID, I kept thinking, where's Obama? I need somebody to address this in a way that will speak to me. And I sort of feel like that now. I'm like, where are our leaders? Where are the people and they have to be us somehow. We're going to have to, at some point, figure out how we're going to get the right people in the right places. If we value not only our lives, but the lives of our children, the lives of our friends, the lives of our roommates, the lives of our loves, we're going to have to figure it out. Thank you so much.